So can you kind of take us through your actual experience in the group? Because obviously you're not there anymore, which
Right.
I think would lead to the conclusion that there's probably issues that you eventually had with it. But what was your experience, both good and bad? Can you kind of just again, for those who might not even be familiar with this group, kind of give us an idea of what does that look like to be a member of Shincheonji? And again, both the maybe the good elements, if you can look back and see any of those, and the negative ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the good elements were definitely, and it's even to this day, the people that I had friendships with there. There's a sense of almost, now what we would call, there's a trauma bond in a way, because everyone is experiencing a very traumatic thing over there. But you don't really, hindsight is 2020, so you don't really think about that until you've left. But there was definitely a closeness with everyone, right? And it's like at any point in time, you could text or call anyone and they're there. It's just, kind of the responsibility, especially if you're a group leader and you've been given that responsibility for your cell group members. But also just, I think the friendships that you develop in the process of figuring out what you're going through, basically, because that seems to change from time to time, especially during COVID and after, where doctrines were changing. There was a lot of confusion, but the negative side is definitely, the cons outweigh the pros. Let's just put it that way, right? And I think, where do I even begin? I think initially, obviously, once you realize where you're at, they tell you what the organization name is, and you've joined. That first year, you're considered a newcomer. So it's a very, everyone kind of treats you very delicately. Don't give her too much to do. Don't push too hard, because they don't want to scare us away, obviously, right? So the expectations are kind of minimal at that stage. As the years went on, though, there was definitely added on responsibility. And while they may not admit it, of course, if we even ask them today, they'd be like, we never tell people to quit their jobs in school. That's ridiculous. Why would we ask people to do that? In reality, I mean, you see those kind of behaviors rewarded in people that do take those extreme measures to show their dedication to the organization, right? And so the idea is that this becomes your focal point of your life. Nothing else matters. The end justifies the means at all times. And so you're put in very stressful situations. In my time there, I went from a newcomer to a group member to then an assistant group member to then a group leader at one point. And the pressure kind of increases as the level goes up, right? And the dedication that's expected of you goes up. And so for me, it was things like, well, I'm really close with my family and I have a very close relationship with them. But in the time frame that I was there was a lot of butting of heads because I was very distant from them. I didn't really care to talk about future plans, career plans, none of that mattered. I was in God's kingdom and that's that, and the push to sacrifice things, even at a point where there's family members in danger and I wanted to go help them. There was an accident and I would be told, what's really a priority here right now? Is it God's work or is it going there? Don't you know that God ultimately knows your dedication and he'll help, your family members? And it was those kind of things where the bite model of them wanting to control almost every aspect of my life. It got to the point where, if you're traveling somewhere, there's a template that they texted me at one point, and I'll never forget that. They texted me a template and I thought, okay, there's just some details on where I'm going, what time my flight leaves, what time it lands there, how long I'll stay there to visit my family and come back. And I realized later on, this was a permission slip that I think other places in Korea use. But in the DMV area, they kind of had modified it a little bit just to not, I guess, scare some people. But amongst the leaders, it was expected that you communicate almost everything about your life, essentially. And so that control was increased every year that I was there, essentially. And time is where you did not sleep. We would have these all-night trainings, or it would start at 10 p.m., didn't end until 6 in the morning or so. And in between that time, you're listening to all these lectures, you're having to take notes to make sure that you're awake and alert. And if they see that you're falling asleep, they've made us like go outside and run laps, right? They're just like, you need to stay awake, get your mindset straight. This isn't appropriate. We come back, do it for a couple of hours, and then they'll ask us to go evangelize at 7 a.m, although you haven't slept the entire night. And at that point, you're just exhausted. It's not even safe to drive anymore, right? And there's actually people that I know personally that have gone into car accidents, things like that, because they were pushed to that limit, which is extremely dangerous and it's not okay for in any sort of situation. But again, the end justifies the means, so it doesn't matter. Another thing was dishonesty, right? The level of dishonesty, Jordan, I mean, it's just mind blowing to me, right? I mean, I think they don't tell you who they are initially. So, you know, they have all these stories of like Abraham not being honest to his wife when he takes Isaac to do what God had asked him to do. So they do a lot of like description is prescription, you know, and vice versa. So for a lot of people who don't pay attention to that, like I didn't, you think, oh yeah, that's right. There's several places in the scripture where people are not completely honest, but also David killed Goliath with a stone. That does not mean you now go and do those things, right? Like, but
David also slept with another man's wife and then killed the husband. Like, well, I guess description is prescription. So here you go, believers. Yeah, and that's a slippery slope.
It is a very slippery slope. And so those things were just adding on over time. And they like to say, like, when people leave, it's personal reasons. Like, they had conflict here. Their faith just wasn't strong enough. And the reality is that's how they maintain the people there, because informational control is real. But it was not the truth, for one. It wasn't the gospel truth. And for the second thing is that it's a high control environment that is extremely unhealthy.